2020, and for those of you that are watching in the future, the world right now has effectively been put on pause. Over 1 million people in the UK have been furloughed, unemployment claims have doubled, and all social interactions are on hold. Worldwide lockdowns, meaning no weddings, celebrations, and the only time you can get out is for exercise and essentials. So things have relaxed a little bit more now, but at the time I was writing this script, this was the case. For someone who lives for social interactions and needs to constantly be doing something, the first few weeks of lockdown were particularly difficult. I'm on my 8th year of doing this project where I film the highlights of my day each and every day. Comparing this year to any other year, I've never done so much sitting around, playing video games and watching TV. None of them being a bad thing, it's just very much a juxtaposition comparing to all my other summers. Watching a lot of movies, I start to notice the majority of these stories followed the same beats. Ordinary person called to adventure, refuses the call, accepts the call, faces challenges and temptations, followed by a revelation, transformations, atonement, return, and end. There was actually a book written on it called A Hero with 1,000 Faces, way back in 1949. That's not a story I want to get into today. One of the other things I noticed was narrative subplot. The secondary, usually less important, supporting side of a story, distinguished from the main plot by taking up less action, having fewer significant events occur with less impact on the world. This also being called the B-plot. So following that train of thought, let's try a thought experiment. We're trying to apply that to real life. For the majority of us, our A-plots are on hold, be that your career, upcoming wedding, seeing friends or family, or going on holiday, training for sports events, all of the above. And then we have our C-plot, stuff that doesn't necessarily affect us directly, like global events, current affairs, politics, these riots, things that we mostly have very little impact on as an individual, which as it currently stands, 2020 is a shamble. Bear in mind, this is just a simplified version for the thought experiment. So we're left with this B-plot, things you do in your life you'd normally forget, doing chores, gardening, going for walks, making a coffee, the supporting events that make up your life story. So the pun being intended here, my B-plot during 2020 COVID pandemic. This story takes place a couple of weeks ago where I was sitting in my conservatory, and I can't actually remember what I was doing there, but I noticed what I thought was a dead bee, lifeless on the floor, upside down in what I could best describe as the dead dog position. As I went to pick up the dead insect, I noticed a slight twitch in the front 2 legs. I've seen on Facebook posts saying that if you find a lethargic bee, you should give it honey or sugar water. Off to the cupboard to grab a teaspoon of honey. I flipped the bee over, presented the spoon, and without any hesitation, the bee fragilely started eating the honey. I thought this was more than likely going to be the highlight of my day, so I thought I'd best film the bee's recovery. Within the next 10 minutes, the bee had gone from not being able to hold itself up to walking around. In fact, it was looking a little chubby. Usually, if it was any other day, I'd put the bee outside and tell it to buzz off. Say I did my bit and leave him to fend for himself. But as it's during the COVID pandemic, and this was the highlight of my day, I thought I'd best see it through. So I took him outside and spent the next 40 minutes following him around the garden, making sure no birds were eyeing him up for a healthy snack. They are high in vitamin B, you see. Vitamin B? Vitamin B? It started to rain and I thought I'd best put him somewhere dry, under my tomato plants. But in hindsight, that probably wasn't a good idea. Jokes aside, the bee did start to recess, losing energy, falling onto his back, not being able to recover. It was at this point I thought maybe I should do a little bit of research. Come on, you need to help yourself. The internet is a weird and wonderful rabbit hole of information. Everyone and their dog seems to have their opinion, and that's no different for the do's and don'ts of bees. I've read lots of conflicting articles on what actually to do with the bees. Put them out of their misery, don't handle them. Feed them sugar water, don't feed them sugar water. But whatever you do, don't feed them honey. What? Don't feed bees honey? According to some articles, honey can contain spores of bacteria called Panabellus, which causes disease in the bees in the beehive. Have I inadvertently killed the bee I was trying to save? As I said, there's a rabbit hole of information. Some beekeepers are actually using honey to feed their hives in the winter. So I've gone back outside with probably now less direction than I started with. As the rain got worse, using common sense rather than looking on the internet, I decided to bring the dying bee back inside to give him the best chance. For the first time, I handled the bees in the palm of my hand after reading another contradicting article online to actually warm the bee up. You know what they say? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Bee puns sting, right? From the bee's perspective, it must have been terrifying being handled by something with a million times the mass of you. But whatever I did, something must have worked, as for the first time in 2 hours the bee flew. Immediately colliding with the conservatory window, I opened the door, and before I could get a chance to get my camera, my new friend had flown out of the door 25 metres into the air, not to be seen again. Now, there was no real moral to this story, no real purpose. The fact that I wanted to make a video, and this is probably one of the more interesting things that's happened to me in the last 3 months. So I hope you enjoyed my ramblings, so please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'd be interested in reading some of your bee stories from lockdowns in the comments below. Now I'll leave you with one more very important question to end this weird and wonderful story with. To be or not to be? That's the real question here.